we will be beginning the roundtable discussion. The co-chair of the roundtable is the co-chair of the roundtable is Sebastian Pugbeil and then Mr. Shimazono. Without further ado, we will be beginning the roundtable discussion of this afternoon. Dr. Pugbeil actually was with us in the second international symposium last year, so I'm looking forward to working with him again this year. Now, I'd like to explain the way we proceed this afternoon in the agenda. We have approximately 4 hours, 40 minutes of roundtable discussion this afternoon, so we have considerable amount of time. And I hope that it will be an opportunity to exchange our views and opinions as much as possible and as actively as possible. We have 3 parts this afternoon. First session is about the standard and criteria for radiation protection. Second part is research agenda for the future. And third discussion is on medical care and medical checkup structure. This is how we would like to proceed this afternoon, but however, that said, I'd like to keep in mind that there is always unexpected elements and the flow of discussion might go somewhere else. May be the case that it might be natural to switch the order of the agenda items, and it might be the case that we might need to cut down the tea break to 1 from the 2 that is scheduled. Now, regarding the first topic, which is the radiation protection standard, having experienced the March 11th nuclear power plant accident, many Japanese people, especially people in the afflicted area, were put under tremendous confusion, which is ongoing today. Because on top of the suffering that is imposed by this accident, there is additional suffering due to the lack of information. There is claims that 100 millisievert it is safe, and these are repeated numerous times. How to interpret such statement is something that is that does not know a clear answer among most citizens, and there are in a way divisions and dividing views regarding these matters. So this is what we would like to tackle as the first subject of discussion. First of all, we would like to ask Sebastian to talk about his basic thinking about this matter. And then, by the way, last evening we had a special where we invited the doctors and medical experts from Fukushima area, where we had opportunity to talk about this matter as well. And at that time, we talked about the whether the basis of the Fukushima Prefectural KKK study, the health management survey, is adequate or not. So that's what we discussed yesterday, and so therefore, I would like to also have Dr. Weberstock, who is very knowledgeable about this matter, to comment as well after Sebastian. And from epidemiological point of view, I'd like to have Mr. Tsuda, Dr. Tsuda, talk about this on the third. And then, of course, we'd like everyone to join in this discussion. So we are hoping to cover the first 3 comments and presentations in the first 20 minutes. So first of all, again, I'd like to ask Sebastian to make his comments, please.
Ihnen habe ich wiedererkannt, darüber habe ich mich sehr gefreut.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you all to today's roundtable. I was happy to recognize some faces.
Konferenz dieser Art war ein Geniestreich.
I think it is a genius who came up with such an important conference. At the second international symposium last year, I remember very well that there are many difficulties.
Von der dritten Konferenz an kann man schon von einer Tradition reden.
But however, this is the third international symposium of this kind, so therefore, this in a way we have already established the tradition.
Ich möchte etwas erzählen darüber oder Sie zum Nachdenken bringen darüber, was wir eigentlich mit den verschiedenen Strahlenschutzgrenzwerten, die wir kennengelernt haben, akzeptieren.
The criterion is threshold for the radiation protection. There are many such criteria, many thresholds, so that's what we'd like to talk about today. Please show the first slide.
Da sieht man, wie sich die Ansichten darüber, was an Strahlenbelastung akzeptabel ist, Ansichten in den letzten 100 Jahren verändert haben.
In the past 100 years, the thinking regarding the acceptable radiation dose has shifted many times, and this chart explains this.
Sich entwickelt hat.
There are many different dose levels that are indicated, as you can see on this page.
Das, was man für akzeptabel hielt, das wurde immer nach unten korrigiert.
In the early days, the dose level was very high, but as the time went by, the stances changed to make the acceptable radiation dose more and more stringent.
Jetzt ist es aber ganz sicher.
And every time there is a new announcement, experts claimed that this is the right dose level. This should be the standard. That has been the case in the past history. However, in 2020, what would be this acceptable radiation dose level? What is the threshold for radiation protection?
Grund, dass diese Entwicklung nach unten jetzt schon aufhört.
Would it be possible that it goes lower than this level? Would this stop at this current level? Turning to the next page.
Ich habe mal hier versucht, grafisch darzustellen, wie sich die Einschätzung des Strahlenrisikos, also des Risikos im Laufe des Lebens an Krebs zu sterben nach einer Strahlenbelastung, wie sich das im Laufe der Zeit entwickelt hat.
This is the lifetime radiation risk due to cancer and leukemia, and the interpretation of the risk per year.
Ich habe hier 4 verschiedene Quellen ausgewählt. Die blauen Balken, die stammen von der Amerikanischen Akademie der Wissenschaften.
The blue line indicates the information that was released from the American National Academy of Science.
Wissenschaftlichen Komitee der Vereinten Nationen für die Wirkung atomarer Strahlen.
The yellow line indicates the information given by UNSCAR, United Nations Scientific Committee for the Effects of Atomic Radiation.
Atombombenabwürfe auf Hiroshima und Nagasaki untersuchen. Grün.
And the green line indicates RERF's information, Radiation Effects Research Foundation.
Da ist zu sehen, dass diese Werte, die dort angegeben werden, nach rechts, also in Richtung auf die 100 bedeutet 2000, deutlich ansteigen.
And the figure 100 that is indicated on the lower right-hand corner is not 100, it's the 2000. This what it indicates. And as you can see,
Ich habe
as
rot
the year
eingemalt die
approaches the year
Position der
2000,
ICRP,
the
der
level becomes
Internationalen
higher and higher.
Strahlenschutzkommission.
What is indicated in the red is the figure that
Das
was
ist
given by
ein
ICRP.
Verein, der praktisch kein politisches Mandat hat, kein wissenschaftliches Mandat hat, aber auf den die Regierungen der Welt hören in Strahlenschutzfragen.
ICRP, in fact, is not a scientific nor academic organization nor a political organization. However, many countries in the world seem to swallow the announcements and publications about
Da ist schon zu
ICRP
sehen, dass
as
diese
is
roten Punkte immer
and
im
completely believing it.
untersten möglichen Bereich sich bewegen.
The red dots indicated here, you can see, is fluctuating on a very
nächste
low
Abbildung.
level, as you can see. And turning to the next
Das
graph,
ist der gleiche Sachverhalt, bloß in einem anderen Maßstab gezeichnet. Da habe ich noch dazugefügt, ganz rechts am Rand, diesen braunen Balken. Der stammt von den Untersuchungen in der Umgebung des Atomwaffentestgebiets in Kasachstan.
this is a result and the data obtained by the A-bomb test that took place in Semipalatinsk in Kazakhstan. The data from this experiment was matched to the data from the previous graph. But as you can see, the right-hand side orange graph is the data from Kazakhstan, from Semipalatinsk.
Erst viele Jahre nach den wissenschaftlichen Erkenntnissen, diese wissenschaftlichen Erkenntnisse akzeptiert.
What I wanted to demonstrate by showing this graph is that ICRP is very reactive in raising the threshold much later than the release or availability of the latest scientific evidence-based information.
Risikofaktor von 1,25% pro Sievert angenommen von der ICRP.
In 1977, ICRP said that the risk of leukemia is 1.25% for 1 millisievert. That's what they stated. And in 1990, they raised it eventually to 5% per 1 millisievert, the risk of leukemia. And then that 5% has been the latest announcement from ICRP up until today.
Die Atombombendaten und auch die Atomwaffentestgebietsdaten schon weit darüber liegen.
However, if you look at the data obtained by ANSCAR, ANSCAR states that the risk is 9 to 13%. Our ERF also states that the risk is about 10 to even 23%. And despite these information from other bodies, ICRP still has maintained their announcement to the 5% level.
1% pro Sievert bedeutet, dass von 100 Leuten, die mit 1 Sievert bestrahlt worden sind, einer im Laufe seines weiteren Lebens sterben wird.
What does 1% mean in reality? Well, if what is the percentage per millisievert risk suggest? If 100 people receive the radiation of 1 millisievert, then 1 in 100 people, one person from this 100 cohort would get leukemia. That's what it means.
Darzustellen, wie sich die Veränderung der Risikofaktoren verknüpft mit den jeweils gültigen Dosisgrenzwerten für beruflich strahlenexponierte Leute miteinander verbindet.
The risk limit, the risk level actually are different for professional exposed staff nuclear workers, and so this chart shows that information together in one chart.
Überblick über die deutschen Strahlenschutzverordnungen.
So when we prepare this graph, we looked at the German Radiation Protection
Die
Decree.
erste Strahlenschutzverordnung 1976 ging von einem Risikofaktor von 0,1% pro Sievert aus.
The German Radiation Protection Decree first was issued in 1976, and at that time the risk level was 0.1% for 1 millisievert. That was the initial level that was announced by the German decree.
50 Millisievert pro Jahr.
And at that time, people who worked in the exposed sector were those limit was set at 50 millisievert per year. These are for the professional exposed staff.
Beruflich strahlenexponierten Leute diesen Grenzwert auch ausschöpfen, dann würde man damit akzeptieren, dass einer von 20.000 daran stirbt.
And when we actually calculate this for professional exposed staff, if they were to receive maximum 50 millisievert per year radiation, that would mean that 1 in every 20,000 people could have died from cancer.
Der Risikofaktor sich verändert im Laufe der Zeit. Der wird immer höher angesetzt, bis zur Strahlenschutzverordnung 2001 auf 4.
And on the very left-hand side column, if you go down the graph, you can see that the risk factor becomes higher and higher as the years goes by.
Für die beruflich Strahlenexponierten wird auch verringert, aber nicht so stark.
The risk factor goes from 0.1 to 1 to 4. And this, going back to the previous graph, please. Despite that, from the dose limit for the professional staff that could be exposed by radiation basically remained constant, or with only gradual change from 50 to only 20 millisievert per year, which is inconsistent.
Sich deutlich verschlechtert.
The risk of cancer by the exposed staff becomes higher, which this is what it means.
Zugrunde legt als handfesten Risikofaktor, dann ist die Verschlechterung noch drastischer, also von 1 auf 20.000 runter auf 1 auf 200.
If you look at the figures at the bottom two lines, these are the reference from the radiation effect research foundation, and that says from 14 to 25% or 10 to 25%. Then this is taking the level of 20 millisievert per year. In case of a woman who is having this kind of dose, the 1 out of 200 could have cancer in that case. Then the next.
Für diese 1 Millisievert anstellen, die seit langer Zeit für die Bevölkerung als akzeptabel gelten.
Traditionally, or the conventionally, we heard 1 millisievert per year is the acceptable level.
1 Millisievert gelten seit den 50er Jahren.
Looking at this 1 millisievert, in fact, that began to be announced from 1950s. However, that time, there was very little consideration that the cancer and leukemia can be induced by the radiation or radioactivity. Since then, many scientific findings has been announced and discovered. However, despite those facts, this level remained the same until today. It remained the same for a long time. Excuse me.
1.666.666 Menschen zu verkraften ist.
The first column, the horizontal column line, the first 1976, the first law on the radiation effect protection law in Germany. According to that, it is the 1 out of 1.666667 million may have cancer.
Wenn man in der Tabelle ganz nach unten geht, wenn man die Daten von Hiroshima und Nagasaki als Grundlage nimmt, die Bestimmung des Risikofaktors, dann verschlechtert sich dieses Verhältnis von 1 zu 1,6 Millionen auf 1 zu 7.100 noch etwas.
Looking at the green areas, that again, that is 1995 announcement of the RERF. In case of 1 millisievert, the worst case is 1 out of 400 general public may die from the cancer or leukemia induced by radioactivity.
Menschenleben, die stillschweigend passiert, hinter den Kulissen, auf die man nicht aufmerksam wird, wenn man nicht bohrt.
I wanted you to see this table because we do not have to emphasize so much about human's life because that's such a norm. And then this table shows how normal it is.
Ein anderes Beispiel.
The foundation of the radioactive protection is a little bit abnormal. That's what I feel.
Stillschweigend akzeptiert wird, dass nach einem Unfall die Grenzwerte für die Lebensmittel und die Grenzwerte für die Menschen einfach erhöht werden, ohne dass angegeben wird, weshalb man das eigentlich macht.
One more thing, which is not spoken, which is outspoken to the public, that in every country is actually that is happening, is that aftermath of nuclear power plant incident or disaster, that without having people know, suddenly you notice that the permissible or the acceptable level of radioactivity is just secretly raised within food or drinks, etc. That do human beings' physical condition become very stronger because of the accident? That's not the case.
Die Begrenzung des wirtschaftlichen Verlustes nach so einer Katastrophe.
Thinking of this in depth, why this acceptable level goes up? Because of economic factors.
Untereinander und mit den Regierungen darüber, was wir uns zumuten lassen wollen im Bereich des Strahlenschutzes.
We need open discussion now. We here include governments and intergovernmental discussions. How much radiation, how much the exposure of the radiation can we permit or accept?
Überlassen, die in den hohen Gremien bisher diese Entscheidung gefällt haben.
So far, talking about such a threshold and a standard level, there were many organizations working on that. But in fact, these levels and criteria were decided by only a handful of people on the top. That's not the right way of discussing. Sebastian, thank you very much. Keith Beverstock. Oh, excuse Dr. Shibanzono. I would like you to introduce the participants about the handout today. the page 1, there is the both Japanese and English written in one page. Page is the Fukushima survey, so-called the triple A's results, and was published the August from the authority. And that is just an excerpt of one page from that result. Last night, we looked into this page and had very active discussions, and I would like to have Beverstock talk about this discussion or follow up.
I find the situation that we're facing here quite extraordinary because I think it's very well established now that there is no... Hello? Yes? That there is no threshold at 100 millisieverts for the induction of cancer by ionizing radiation. And we have known that for quite some time. I can't recall exactly when this paper was published, but around the middle of the 2000s, I think. And it's published in a journal, the Proceedings of the American Academy of Sciences, PNAS. And it has authorship of very senior scientists from across the world, really. And it is based on an analysis of the bomb survivor data. Now, you cannot on that slide see, on that picture, that graph, you cannot see most of the data that's available. But the dotted line is an extrapolation from data acquired from more than 400 millisieverts up to 2 millisieverts, 400 up to 2 sieverts. And so it's extrapolated down, and it's enlarged at the bottom here so that you can see the best estimates at doses under 400 millisieverts. And you can see that the majority of points there for estimates of the risk at specific doses lie above the dotted line. In other words, it looks like a linear extrapolation from the dose range, say 400 millisieverts to 2 sieverts, which is what we regard as relatively high doses, down to the doses where we're really concerned, which is, for example, below 100 millisieverts, is in fact a linear extrapolation, and that underestimates the true risk. These other lines, these curvy lines, are attempts to model that data to other than a straight line. I wouldn't pay too much attention to those, but they're clearly, the point that I want to make is that clearly there is no threshold at 100 millisieverts.
Very much for the explanation for the established research result compared to this. KKK website of the health management survey conducted by the Fukushima Radiation and Health Center is not appropriate compared to the well-established data. As to this topic, I'd like to solicit Dr. Tsuda as well as other speakers for additional explanation. First of all, I'd like to invite Dr. Tsuda to share your thought. I have prepared some documents for today's session. However, it's a bit different from the topic of 100 millisieverts. But first of all, I have a question to you. That is,
this level of 100 millisievert and below has no significant impact. As to this sentence or wording, if you refer to the ICRP, there is a responding description and ICRP recommendations. However, as you can see here, sometimes UNSCIA refers this number from time to time. If you look at the 2008 article issued by the UNSCIA, I cannot identify that corresponding article at all. I tried to identify the responding article, however, I cannot find it. It's just an approximate sentences. By the way, UNSCIA's descriptions are quite long. Therefore, if you happen to know where exactly UNSCIA refers this 100 millisievert, please teach it to me. Actually, nobody seems a question, therefore please move on, Dr. Tsuda. I believe some of you may know it. Maybe I can ask UNSCIA directly to identify, or I can raise this question to Dr. Niwa later on. At any rate, this shows the paper of Dr. Suzuki and Dr. Yamashita in 2012. By the way, Dr. Suzuki is not that famous Suzuki, it's a Suzuki number 2, different Dr. Suzuki. In the morning session today, we heard that the radiation below 100 millisievert does not cause cancer. This does not have a statistical significance and that does not have an impact. And this comment is a result of using these two aspects, which is a really amateur problem or error. I explained it. You should not confuse these two concepts. Please go back to the original slide. Yes, this one. If you look at this paper, in short, it's not statistically significant, and that's what this paper says over and over again. However, it's different from whether or not there is an impact, and this paper does not say anything about impact or influence. Actually, below 100 millisievert does not cause cancer. There's no expert say such a thing, including that Dr. Yamashita. However, here in Japan, without any confirmation or validation in writing because of word of mouth, as you can see in the rebuttal against the Global, many people here in Japan believe that below 100 millisievert does not cause cancer. So this is a really disguise or change into something totally different. But this is the popular sentence in Japan, or this is due to the Japanese culture characteristics. And the same thing has happened in Minamata disease caused by the mercury pollution. Meaning that no expert says such a thing, but it's deemed as a word from the distinguished expert. And then the bureaucrats and the politicians leverage on that. And because they believe in that, that belief is into a specific policy. Now please move on to the next slide. From April 2011 to April 2012, in 1 year, this is the schematic posted on the Center of the Radiation Medicine. And it says below 100 millisievert does not cause cancers. And this schematic has been referred and cited by many other papers and articles. And then, in April 2012, sneakingly, this picture was replaced with this one. However, they don't announce that they have replaced with the old picture with a new one. They may acknowledge at the bottom of the heart that they had made mistakes. That's why they replaced with the new correct version with the old mistaken version. This summer, finally, this was exposed by a newspaper. As of the 29th of July this year, the center has made an excuse saying that the statistical reference and effect had been mixed up. That's why the former wrong version of the schematic was posted. Then there's no significance. It's different from there's no effect. But many people confuse them up, and this is Gaussian. Sorry, this is the standard deviation, normal distribution. And if you look at the tail part, whether the point is within the tail or not, is about statistical difference or statistical significance. And then the different issue of no effect or effect. You have to look at the summit or peak of the curve to identify where the peak exactly locates. As I have mentioned already, as early as 1978, if you look at the only statistical significance alone, you would miss up many important signals as indicated by this paper. After that, there is an international medical journal editors council was held, appealing the importance of not focusing too much on the statistical significance, and they have actually issued the alarm or caveat, and this caveat has been referred and cited by many experts. However, this important issue has yet to be communicated well to Japanese scientists and medical experts. And then in the 1990s, when I was in the United States to study the epidemiology, there was a seminar of epidemiology, and this is a typical mark on the T-shirt for such seminar. P-value. Whether there is a significant difference or statistical significance, we should not talk only about that. So in order to warn ourselves, we have this mark. However, if you look at the papers by Dr. Yamashita, he talks only about p-value and statistical significance. Then statistical significance, even if the impact is the same, sometimes in the initial phase there is no statistical significance, but under a certain condition you see the significance, statistical significance. One of those examples can be seen here. For example, sample size is really huge, or sensitivity against radiation. If the sample or target is limited only to the cancer that has a high sensitivity to the radiation, then you can generate the statistical significance. Or maybe you can use age. If you focus on only the younger age, meaning that those who are sensitive to radiation, if your analysis target population is limited to young people, then you can show the significance statistically. There are other ways you can manufacture or manipulate the statistical difference, because all you have to create is 5% more than the other. Apart from that technical issues, I'd like to raise this point, that why the Japanese societies made such a mistake. is because they compared with the Fukushima victims, A-bomb victims of Nagasaki and Hiroshima are way far more. If Hiroshima and Nagasaki A-bomb victims cannot show statistical significance, they believe in that they can never show the significance statistically. However, actually, the truth is totally opposite. Hiroshima and Nagasaki A-bomb the victims has only less than 60,000 people who have exposed below 100 millisievert. However, in Fukushima, according to the health survey, assuming the number of people who are older than 18 years old, or Fukushima's official data of the person who was exposed to the radiation below 1 millisievert, above 1 millisievert, correction, above 1 millisievert. Overwhelmingly, the number of victims or the exposed persons count is way far bigger in Fukushima than the A-bomb victims. That means that you can see the statistical difference, significance, meaning that we should not rely only on the Hiroshima and Nagasaki data alone.
Well, we can skip this page, basically. The Hiroshima and Nagasaki data are small data, relatively speaking. So you can turn the page. This is the summary of CARDIS of 2011. And here it states that there are many cases and possible cancer occurrence under 100 millisievert exposure. And going on to the next page, the fact that there are many cancers occurrence and incidence of the 100 millisievert is already evidenced by the X-ray radiation use, because consider a tremendous amount of people are irradiated through X-rays and medical use. Diagnostic radiation. And so, looking at the following pages and following charts, this also confirms the same statement. As I referred to an UK study that was introduced earlier, the impact of X-ray diagnosis on pediatric cancer and impact to children. Well, this, by the way, this he is referring to the brochure, to the presentation, a copy of a presentation that is included in yesterday's package, and to be precise, it's on page 9 of yesterday's package. And this is a British, what is announced this year in British Medical Journal. And this took place in Australia. 5 to 50 millisievert exposure through CT scan. Uh, 680,000 children and adults were the target of this study in Australia. 11,000 people or patients who are enrolled in the Medicaid, the public or national medical scheme or health scheme, were the subject of this study, and they were studied. And so obviously, on top of the radiation-induced cancer, all cancer incidence had increased in a statistically significant manner. The International Cancer Study Association covers various European countries and look at the impact of CT scan and radiation exposure on these European countries. These are international joint research that is undertaken, and in that sense, such big data on the subject are being produced as we speak. But when it comes to the impact to the fetus, there has been a historic significant data. This is what we are showing on the slide currently on impact of radiation in fetus. This comes from the UK study. The impact of background radiation and natural radiation on children and leukemia. The research team which undertook this other study also undertook this study on the fetus, and by the way, this research team undertook many other important studies. In 1950s, Alice Stewart studied the impact of radiation on fetus, and this was published in Lancet Journal, and that was the very beginning of the study here. And since then, worldwide, there has been similar studies. This is, by the way, the data from the Alice Stewart study. And going back to the previous page, please. Looking for the right chart right now. Excuse me. Finally found the right chart. So at that time, when this study was published, breached babies, in order to study if the baby is breached, they actually took the x-rays to see if the baby is upside down or not. That was the practice at that time in 1950s, I believe. And now today, we do not no longer do so. We use ultrasound to check the status of the children. But previously at that time, it was the X-ray that was being used. And when the baby was born, there were many incidents of different cancers, and that was the finding in the 1960s and 70s. Subsequently. And going to the next page, there is another study by the Oxford University. It's an Oxford Childhood Cancer Study on childhood cancer and intrauterine irradiation. And based on this study, which hospital and which, thanks to this study, now there are warnings that is posted on every hospital in every X-ray room that if you might be pregnant, then you have to notify. So no cancer below 100 millisievert truly is a statement that completely contradicts what we are seeing as warning signs in every hospital, in every X-ray room, and that is why this discussion is not an issue that is limited only in Fukushima, but this discussion really impacts the entirety of the discussion on radiation protection in Japan. Because of erroneous information, the reality is distorted. The distorted information that we are exposed to in Japan are putting Japanese people at risk. And this is something that I'd like all of you to keep in mind. Thank you very much. We have had the statements and comments from 3 people so far about radiation protection criteria and standard. And we have explanation about the current situation as well as the background. And perhaps other people may have additional comments or questions. At this point, I'd like to welcome them. And if you are making comments, please be mindful of the simultaneous interpretation. Please make sure that you speak into the microphone and bring the microphone very closely. Dr. Hoffman, perhaps you may have some comment or question. Comment?
Given the latest epidemiologic evidence, let's say since about 10 years, in the literature there's no doubt about that there's first no threshold, and there is much evidence, directly measurable evidence for health
直
effects
接的に
below
健康評価にできるということで100ミリシーベルト以下が出
I'm
る
afraid that Japan is presently the only country that considers 100 millisievert as no harm for health of people.
はい、困ったことだなと思いますが、はい、昨日福島県の
And
方々に
yesterday we had
その
the
辺りの
medical
問題
experts and doctors from Fukushima last evening, and they were talking about their concerns and difficulties in making people understand. So, Konda-san, what do you think? What? I think most citizens understand that 100 millisievert is a completely unfounded statement, and then it was then revised to 20 millisievert, according to Yamashita-san. And also, many citizens feel that, well, like they cannot directly fight the politicians or the government. If the government has decided a threshold, then they cannot refute that. That's how people in Fukushima feel.
The methyl isocyanide gas tragedy in Bhopal in 1984, in which 60,000 people died. The point I'm trying to make is that there's a nexus between industry, government, and politicians. That nexus is in funding of scientific research. Amongst the scientists here, you would know how industry funds scientists to manipulate data, point 1. Though there are independent scientists too, Hoffman's study being a case in point yesterday, where he questioned the German government. Point 2 is the question of compensation. If you raise and prove the threshold relation to cancer, if and when you take the case to court and prove a direct correlation, the compensation issue comes into question, and monetary compensation may reduce and create a political crisis, rather may increase a political crisis and reduce the revenue. Thank you.
I come from Koriyama City, Fukushima. I'd like to talk a bit about the reality of Koriyama. In Koriyama, we are undertaking the whole body counter measurement, and the people who have undergone the whole body counter measurement, actually to them we provide one information sheet. that information sheet, actually, that information comes from the Japanese Association of the Nuclear and Radiation Effect. And in that, it is said that there is no one clear confirmation of the impact of health under 100 millisievert. That is one statement that is included in the information sheet from the whole body counter checks. So many people come to the check with concern in their mind, but then even if they come to the authority to get the whole body counter check, they are received this such information that under 100 millisievert there is no clear evidence, and that is the reality. So excuse me, she's from Koyama City, and she was referring to a whole body counter check that is undertaken in Koyama City. And earlier, there was a mention about Professor Yamashita claiming that it's the government's claim about the threshold. And regarding the ordinary citizens, there is no clear threshold that is stipulated by law, but then workers and radiation workers, there's a clear stipulation under the Japanese law about the threshold and the dose limit. And so most people who live in Fukushima Prefecture in that area actually going over the limit of those limits that is stipulated by law. And then we really need to think about what is an government. That is the kind of discussion that that we have neglected so far in Japan. But when we look at the actual law, the body of law, there is a clear stipulation in the Japanese law, labor law. And regarding pregnant women, there is a statement of 2 millisievert being the dose limit for radiation protection, 2 millisievert for pregnant women. And even for workers, there is a clear level, so it's quite low. For pregnant workers, it's 2 millisieverts, and that's for radiation workers. So the problem is that Professor Yamashita does not know that there is a whole body of law regarding radiation protection, and had he known, he would not make such claims. And that is why he can make such claims. As I said before, many bureaucrats and politicians tend to have their mindset in policies, and they seem to believe that certain certain statements are scientific statements and scientific facts. That is, I believe that reflects the Japanese culture or Japanese society. That in turn is reflected in the Japanese government's policies. The UNSCARE report will be issued soon in the near future, and I'm wondering really what the media coverage of this UNSCARE report would be when we undertake the dose evaluation. In most cases, it was under 100 millisieverts, so then there probably will not be any health effect. This is the expectations of what the coverage might be from the UNSCARE report, and I'm wondering what your opinion is about that. Professor Imanaka, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Imanaka. I'm wondering if I am following. Sorry, my name is Dr. Imanaka, and I'm wondering if I'm following the topic, foreground topic. Sorry, interpreter cannot hear well. Particularly when we talk about the effect of the radiation. And then, of course, everyone knows that the dose and the risk of cancer is in proportion. And that is the common sense of everyone, including scientists and the general public. But seems like Japan, this is not applicable to the Japanese scientific community. In Japan, up to 100 millisievert is safe, And if they don't accept internationally, this is international abnormality or the immorality. 1 millisievert, 0.1 millisievert, no matter what the level is, there is always a risk. So then what does it mean just to impose to set the level, meaning that the authority impose certain risk on the people. Therefore, this setting up the risk is not the science, that is social, political decision. And that is not scientific decision. We need to reconfirm that within ourselves. There is a term the authority always use, cost and benefit balance. So when we look at the benefit, then the cost, which is a risk that we have to take, we have to balance up. But whose benefit is that? That is the industry, nuclear industry and other related industry, and certain part of the government. So when we say let's take a balance, when we have two different scales to balance up, how can we balance? So this is really the social issue that we really look into. Then that we should be the ones who are allowed to decide, allowed to know, and we need to we needed to be able to exercise our right to refuse to take risk. Of course, there have to be certain kind of compromising points, but that's not everyone has the same level of compromisation. So that I feel that everyone has the right to choose. Angelica, yes.
In German television, in the beginning of October, there was a small film on this topic, on the Ansgar study. Right now, the chairman of the Ansgar committee is a German professor, Professor Wolfgang Weiss. And he was interviewed by the German television, it was Dreisat, 3sat. And he said there, and I want to read it correctly to you, Professor Wolfgang Weiss said about the result of the Ansgar study. Statistically, remind the word statistically, you know it from Professor Yamashita. Statistically, he said, we do not see any direct risk or health effects that can be related to the radiation exposure from the Fukushima accident 2011. And this reminds me very much of the completely wrong evaluation of the Chernobyl forum, which was given in 1991. And at that time they said, we found the Chernobyl forum, quote, we found no health effects that could be directly related to the Chernobyl accident. And please remind that 5 years after the Chernobyl accident, the rise of thyroid cancer had been statistically and also pathologically proved. So they knew about it and they lied. So as for the Fukushima accident, we all know, and especially we have Japanese people know, that the Japanese government did not distribute any potassium iodide tablets for the prophylaxis to blockade radioiodine uptake. And so the Ansgar health study does not mention that at all. They are not interested in this, in all these facts. IPPNW, the doctors organization I represent, they got before draft of this study, and so we made critique on that study, and we will publish it on the same day when the Ansgar study will be published on the 26th of October. And I would recommend that this community here asks for right facts and for the truth of the Chernobyl health of the Fukushima health effects from Ansgar.
The discussion so far, I think internationally it is the common sense not to have the rigid threshold, and Japan is the abnormal in that sense. WHO, IEA, ICRP, all other related international organizations, they do have very serious attention on the Japanese situation. What I mean is, if they have such attention, then they should be coming to intervene the Japanese situation much strongly. There is accumulation of the international studies that all the scientists knows, but despite that, it's kind of ignoring that kind of the accumulation of medical studies and report in the past is another norm of an international scientist. I don't know. However, we have to make it very clear that and then what is the relationship with the Fukushima? Even ICRP is not making any kind of strong intervention. 2 years ago, they issued recommendations, but since then, they kept themselves very quiet about this issue. What I'm talking about is low-level doses of the radiation regarding to Fukushima so far. So I really feel all the international scientists here to look into that and help ICRP to make more positive intervention to this issue. The UNSCARE has the fourth committee. UNSCARE is planning to submit their report to the fourth committee. In this report, discussing that will be less than 10 millisievert of the lifetime exposure of Fukushima people. Therefore, there will be no health effect. And I'd rather say this very definite terms. IPAMWs, the German, and also physician for the social responsibility, preparing this critics on this. And I think Japanese medical community and all the related groups should submit your critics too. Of course, I am not a scientist, but I did draft such a critic model paper. This is very preliminary draft, so I hope you will look at it and give me your tell me some comments. And the October 12th with the Physician for Social Responsibility and the Human Rights Now on the December the 12th, we'll be having the event in front of the United Nations in New York. So I hope ICRP, UNSCARE's members and Anna Grover should be there. So I'm extending you invitations to that event. Then it will be very comprehensive discussions of all related forks of life. And if anybody who has possibility of going to United States during that time, please do join us.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ito. And the Japanese Civil Society, we'd like to ask for the review of the report on Fukushima victims in UNSCARE report. This is the NPO called the Human Rights Now, and Ms. Ito is the Secretary General of this NPO, and this it's a report issued by this NPO asking for the review of UNSCARE report. Now, Ms. Arima, please. Thank you very much. I'm from Sukagawa area in Fukushima. Nice to meet you. As one of the human beings, I'd like to share what's happening right now in Fukushima on this moment. As you heard from the Human Rights Now, I'd like to take this opportunity to appreciate what you have done, and I also appreciate for giving me such an opportunity for yesterday and today, because I am a mother, and I believe some of you are mothers, and you want to change government and the way administration is performed. However, in many aspects, everything is too slow to see the progress. However, on the field, there is a buzzword of recovery, and another buzzword is the eradication of concern. Eradication of concern entails, as I mentioned, there's a very good misgivings. Not only that, in order to eradicate the concerns, we have studied quite a lot, and we are now knowing and understanding the potential risks. However, the problem is that the attitude of the government insists that there's no problem, no concern at all, and bombarding us with groundless information. No matter how much we have studied the health research, but what we get is a sheet of paper saying that no impact on your child. We cannot change the government because government will not budge. No effect. For your corporation, please stand by with us to work on the government. That's why I spoke up. Thank you very much. As to the report of the UNSCARE, because the dose is very low, therefore there will be no effect on the human health. However, psychological impact should be considered. Therefore, misgivings is not good. Therefore, the special care for a child will be necessary. And this is the expected content of the report, as you may have here in the mass media reports. Do you have a say, Ms. Matsui? Yes, thank you very much. I've heard the discussions, and our main topic so far is the dose. However, another problem is nuclides. For example, Japanese people have focused on the cesium among many nuclides. However, other nuclides may cause a problem. However, I don't know why people don't talk about the other nuclides than cesium. For example, the Asahi newspaper made a headline when the pool of an elementary school was surveyed and the high concentration of cesium was detected within the Fukushima prefecture. And soil was sent to the Berlin Center in Germany to study details, and we have a fresh result from that, and we found that cesium concentration in the soil is found very high. In addition to that, although it's 1,000, but the strontium is also detected. So how we take this fact, how we have to make of this, because I work for the school, and we rub the walls of the pool to clean up perfectly. Still, there are some soils and sediments deposited at the floor of the pool, and a little bit of plutonium and strontium were detected in the pool where our child is swimming. And you can see, do you interpret that there is no problem because this is the same level as background radiation? I'd like to know your opinions on this. As lawyer Ito mentioned, when we communicate this issue with the international community, I'd like you to include it. So we have to consider other nuclides. We should broaden our views to consider many other nuclides. Thank you very much. I believe Dr. Okada is an expert in nuclides. In addition to that, if the international agencies notice strange, wrong radiation protection of the government of Japan, then maybe the international society or international agencies might give an invisible push to the government of Japan. By the way, don't hit the microphone to test the audio level of the microphone because it will damage the ears of poor interpreters, and please speak into the microphone rather than hitting it out. Yeah, we got the measurement of nuclides. Therefore, I'd like to share the result of that measurement in Idateserie. Of course, we measured cesium followed by strontium and plutonium measurement. As to strontium, compared to cesium, it's 1,000 to 1 in 2,000. As to plutonium, it's about 1 millionth or less than that. Therefore, based on this dose and considering the impact from radiation, to me, I believe for the time being we can focus only on cesium because the ambient contamination, if you focus on the ambient contamination or aerial contamination, you can focus only on cesium, meaning that the oceanic contamination is a different story. As to the plutonium, there may be the contamination coming from Fukushima, but there was a bomb test in the past, and we have to consider that because when you consider the comparison between the different types of plutonium, the nuclear air bomb test has a similar ratio between these two types of plutonium. Of course, I have to study them more. Strontium, which is 1,000th this value. If you think about Chernobyl, Kiev, 100 kilometers off from the Chernobyl NPP, strontium got 10% to 15% higher than the cesium. In such a case, we have to evaluate the strontium. Therefore, the nuclide profile is different between Chernobyl and Fukushima, including plutonium. Is there Dr. Mori here? Yes. I didn't expect you to point me out. I'm from Hyogo. I have many things to say, but just one point. In the previous discussion, the criteria of radiation protection or under-evaluation for that were lively discussed. Let me give you my conclusion first. Even after Fukushima accident or even after Chernobyl accident, still we want to promote nuclear energy. I believe that should be considered when we think about criteria for radiation protection, because Dr. Yamashita's 100 millisievert as well as the 20 millisievert authorized by other authorities. As you know, this is the radiation dose for emergency situations, and this is based on the recommendation by the ICRP after Chernobyl in the 1990s. There is a renewed criteria to be higher, and then after the Fukushima accident, this is referred. Therefore, even with ICRP, when we have a scientific discussion, they said that an LNT, linear non-threshold hypothesis, however, we have to think about the social impact. In addition to that, we have to delineate, or we have to differentiate the emergency situation and the under usual operation. And even under the emergency situation, 100 millisievert should be considered that after the situation put under control, it can be reduced. Therefore, based on the severe accident, ICRP has issued the recommendation or recommended value, and so is UNSCARE and IAEA, as well as WHO, because the nuclear power plant is for commercial use or the peaceful use, and based on that usage purpose, the threshold is set. Therefore, when we make a criticism, we should not just say that this is the international norm, this is the scientific norm, because the Earth has many communities and societies. For example, under the emergency situation, the threshold is 100 millisievert. Therefore, I don't think Dr. Yamashita is such a sloppy person. And it's not due to the Japanese culture. Rather than that, they said that they are based on the international standard. But now we have to remind this point in our mind when we have a discussion, level-headed discussion, as to the scientific criteria and the policy decisions. I believe they are sometimes confused. For instance, it should be the political decision, but sometimes the political decision is discussed in the scientific meeting or scientific context. Former town chief, Mr. Idogawa, the former town chief of Futaba, can you please say your opinion? Thank you very much. I'm Idogawa. Thank you very much for discussing this urgent issue. But still, problem has existed because on a daily basis, there are people exposed to radiation, meaning that they're exposed to the risk day in and day out. So it's not about a number. It's not about a figure, including children. It's almost a killing because lethal dose is an exposure source of many people. Therefore, based on this fact, please have a discussion because I have felt that radiation standard can determine whether we can move for nuclear power generation or not. It should not be a go or no-go decision criteria because many people live in the area where there is no radiation and we can say that they are equal to us. No, they are not equal to us. Therefore, when they think about the radiation issue, exposure issue, yes, I have discussed with many people, including the TEPCO, Fukushima Prefectural government officers, as well as the central government of Japan. However, the most urgent issue is to evacuate Fukushima people to the place where there is no radiation risk at all. Therefore, among local government, they should have a discussion. However, there's no top people and the local governments got together to have a discussion. Therefore, that's why the community people are suffering. In addition to that, as you see in the TV conference of TEPCO, the Fukushima governor asked the TEPCO to eliminate any radiation risk, and I believe this is very significant. In addition to that, the information of Speedy is kept. And because of that, the secret information of Speedy, we had to evacuate ourselves from a heavy traffic congestion. And with a high sievert or radiation, we had to live without knowing that, and there is no instruction to get potassium iodide. And we are alienated from any information that we should have known. Therefore, please delve into this fact, because we want to live in the place where there's no radiation risk, and we want to let our children live in the radiation-free places. Therefore, please think about this. Thank you very much. Have to listen to the voices of Fukushima people, and I believe we have to put it at the core of our discussions. I see many people's hands shooting up in the air, but sorry, I have to move on to the next session in the interest of time. Now, I'd like to ask Mr. Iwata to summarize this session. And then after that, I'd like to ask Dr. Sebastian, Dr. Tsuda, can you please share your comments as a conclusion of the discussion round table 1? First of all, Dr. Iwata first. Rather than rushing through, we'd better to go back, one step back, to see the starting point. As Dr. Shimada mentioned, this Fukushima Prefectural University's comment here on the screen. Someone mentioned the international standard is 100 millisievert under emergency. However, what you see on the screen is not the emergency standard. Rather than that, as a result of epidemiology studies, 100 millisievert below radiation does not have a confirmed verified data on the health impact. And this is a result of evaluation of UNSCEAR, and this is a remark from that. As Dr. Tsuda mentioned, I have a new concern. Of course, it's related to Fukushima, but it's also about the future on the medical practice. This will be used. I have been injured many times, therefore I got many radiation. For instance, the doctor casually said to me that, okay, let's take an X-ray picture even if I have a slight cold. That's why medical radiation is really rampant in Japan among advanced countries. And there's no control at all if 100 millisievert get new life. Because not only the ordinary people, but also medical people, experts believe in that 100 millisievert is a safe level. Therefore, the 100 millisievert and the development of diseases, we have to raise our voices to enlighten people, because below 100 millisievert, there is an evident detriment impact on the health, even with below 100 millisievert. Thank you very much. Now, Dr. Weverstock. I saw a TV program and you were featured on this TV program in Germany on the international stage, and I believe you have been acquainted with many people in UNSCEAR from such a distinguished expert viewpoint. What can you say?
Well, I would hope that UNSCEAR could produce a balanced report, but so far we haven't seen the evidence that it has done that on this particular occasion. And I have to say that some of its reports on Chernobyl have not been of the highest scientific standard. And that is partly because that is partly a political organization. When they talk about, as I believe they did in that German film, that there were 70 experts contributing to the UNSCEAR report, well, they weren't all experts in science. They were experts in politics, many of them, because they are people who are nominated by their country to attend those meetings and to approve those reports. So I think we have come to expect that there will be some political element in an UNSCEAR report. However, I will be very, very surprised if UNSCEAR was to adopt the 100 millisievert threshold. I don't believe they can, because all the UN agencies are bound by what are called the basic safety standards, and they specifically refute the idea that there should be any threshold. So I think we have to look forward, I think, only about a little over a week to see what they're going to say. I hope, for the integrity of the United Nations, that they don't do anything as serious as that. But I doubt that we could rely entirely on the scientific integrity of that report.
So we need to carefully watch the outcome of the UNSCEAR report, and that if there is any issues in the content of the report, then we need to raise our voice. And when it comes to the UNSCEAR's positioning and the Fukushima Prefectural positioning, and the information that is on the Fukushima Prefectural website's information, then we need to rectify the contents of the website of the Fukushima Prefecture. Professor Tsuda. Iwata-san earlier talked about the Japanese radiation exposure, and I'd like to comment on that, and I'd like to refer to a Lancet journal publicized paper this is as a comparison study among 15 countries in terms of the radiation exposure. And among the 15 countries, it is clear that Japan is the top country, the top runner in terms of the radiation exposure. And it's compared to, for example, Germany, the Japanese figure is 3 times as high as the German level. I don't know if you could see it from here. This is Japan in the graph, and which is much higher than the other countries that are referred to here. And 2 more points I'd like to comment regarding the anxiety or misgivings that was earlier mentioned. Well, I am an advisor to the Futaba city, and there's an advisor meeting that takes place 3 times a year in Fukushima Prefecture and in other areas. And at that meeting, I always say that the anxiety is raised because of the extreme statements like there is no cancer under 100 millisievert. Many ex-advisors say that it is safe, and then therefore these experts are quite surprised about my statement saying that it is because of such extreme statements that people are feeling anxious. So in that sense, it is clear from their behavior and their response that they do not understand why people and ordinary citizens are feeling concern. And that is why in the June study meeting, I have suggested and I made recommendation that we should not say such statement as no cancer under 100 millisievert. But Mr. Sato and other parties still continue to publish papers and statements regarding these 100 millisievert thresholds. In February, WHO submitted a report on the health effect of radiation. And there are mixed responses to this WHO report. But the report clearly states that there will be cancer that will occur in Fukushima Prefecture. But that said, in Japan, the media have mixed coverage saying that there will be cancer or there will not be cancer. And for those media that states that there will be cancer, there were criticisms and refutation from various bodies, including the Ministry of Environment. But then if you look at the actual report from WHO, it clearly states that there will be cancer. Asahi newspaper, for example, made a statement and wrote an article, but we always need to refer to the original document. So and it seems that I believe that some people have access to the original document. So if you have the access to the original document, that is the basis of the Asahi newspaper, and which is, by the way, the report that will be issued in 1 week's time, then I'm really interested on what it actually says here. There are many other people who'd like to make comments or ask questions, but there is the time limitation, and also there are some questions that were uncovered this morning about the session number 2 from yesterday. And the session 2 of the roundtable discussion today is about the research agenda for the future. And also, we will also need to cover the discussion about the Fukushima's health management survey and what to do about the medical care and medical checkup structure in Japan and in Fukushima. These are all important discussions that we need to talk about, so we would like to take a break now. But before we do that, we'd like to have a final word from Sebastian, please.
In Deutschland gibt es ein Märchen von einem bösen Zwerg, der heißt Rumpelstilzchen.
In Germany, there is a fable, a children's fable of a mischievous fairy. This fairy plays tricks, but it has one weakness, which is that if a young woman can name his real name, which is very hard to pronounce, then he will lose all magical powers. But that doesn't apply to scientists. If we were to name the scientist's real name, this will not make them lose power. This will not solve the problem.
Bei den großen internationalen Organisationen, in denen die Vertreter der Atomindustrie und der Atomwaffenindustrie sitzen, dass wir es mit einer mafiösen Struktur zu tun haben.
The radiation protection, radiation risk communication from a large international organization. When we look at that, we can see that there is influence from the radiation, the nuclear industry, or those who would like to use nuclear for wartime use and as weapon. And that is why there are many difficulties.
Aber hinter verschlossenen Türen. Und was sie nicht gerne haben, ist, wenn man sie beim Namen nennt.
In a large international organization and in a meeting of such international organization, the discussion takes place behind closed doors. Therefore, it is not possible to these international organizations do not like when outside people enter or name the names. We've been naming Mr. Yamashita or Professor Yamashita by name, but I'm sure there are other people that about whom we need to name the names.
Immer wieder die gleiche Kritik zu äußern.
Actually, when we talk about the radiation protection issue, we have been fighting for many years so far, and we have been quite vocal in our criticism about radiation protection, and we are getting to a point where we started to tire.
Und auch durch Veranstaltungen wie diese gestern und heute, wir dazu gezwungen werden, diese alten Überlegungen nochmal aktuell zu durchdenken. Und vieles von dem, was wir hier an Japan jetzt kritisieren, das müssen wir ganz genauso in Deutschland und im Rest der Welt auch noch lösen. Das ist nicht gelöst.
I'm very happy that this symposium is taking place because we are getting to a point where we are tiring ourselves and we are forgetting certain important points. This symposium is reminding us of what is important, what we used to think about in the past. It is reminding us of these important matters, and it is renewing our sense of awareness that we need to continue fighting. So I'd like to once again thank the organizer for holding this symposium.
Das sind die international einigermaßen von den Mächtigen akzeptierten Spielregeln im Umgang mit der Bevölkerung nach einer Katastrophe.
We need to understand where the problem lies, and what is clear now is that the various international organizations and various governments in different countries these parties have erroneous understanding about the impact of such nuclear accidents on their people.
Für alle Länder der Welt, auch für die Staaten, die keine Kernkraftwerke haben, eine lebenswichtige Frage.
A non-nuclear country, non-nuclear power, even for non-nuclear power, this is not a problem that does not concern them. It does concern them, so therefore we need to all jointly think about this issue. Thank you very much. I know that there are many more comments and questions. I would like to apologize as the moderator of the session that I could not cover everything in this session, but would like to take a break now. And it's now 3:45. We would like to take a quick 15 minutes break and resume and start the next session at 4 p.m. in 15 minutes.
Also, I'd like to ask all of you to move closer to the center of the room so we can all huddle together to have a more close discussion. We know that we have a huge hurdle and difficulty in front of us, and we need to change things through such holding of such symposiums. There is a role that the science can play, and there is a role in the discussion and communication between the scientists and the citizens. That is perhaps the conclusion, the overarching conclusion of this first session of the roundtable, I believe. So let us now take the break. I'd like to ask some of you who might be leaving in the middle. If you are not staying till the end, please leave the simultaneous interpretation device, the headsets, as well as your name cards at the entrance. Please give it back to the staff members.